When people think of historic preservation, they frequently suffer from the misconception that its role is just to protect historic buildings. Sometimes they branch out into sites, like battlefields or cemeteries. It's not uncommon, though, for people in the field to forget or even not recognize that the protection of archaeological resources is a significant part of what historic preservation is. Part of this is a bias in thinking preservation is all about buildings, and part of it is that people often don't really understand what archaeology is. In fact, if you look at research on the public's perception of archaeology, there are some common misunderstandings. The most common misconception is that archaeologists dig up dinosaurs. Of course, there are laws that declare dinosaur bones to be part of cultural heritage. Just ask the Florida man who was arrested in 2012 for smuggling and then auctioning off dinosaur skeletons from Mongolia in violation of a cultural resources law. And of course, we have the predominant idea of what archaeologists do. At least here we have both genders represented, because another misconception is that there are no women archaeologists, which is clearly untrue. But there is the idea that archaeology is treasure hunting or tomb raiding. A lot of the general public thinks that what archaeologists do find, they get to keep. Another misconception is that this is what archaeologists do every day. This might be what a lot of archaeologists want to do all day, but for every day spent excavating, weeks or months are spent in an office or lab recording and analyzing details and data. That people don't understand what archaeologists do, what it is that they're contributing, it makes it more difficult to protect archaeological resources globally. After all, if someone thinks an archaeologist gets to keep whatever they find, what's going to stop them from taking something? If the public doesn't understand what's going on, then they won't understand what it is that needs to be protected and why it needs to be protected. Of course, that's an argument for public archaeology, but it's also an argument for laws protecting archaeology. Remember, we got the National Historic Preservation Act in response to buildings that people cared about being torn down. We got NEPA in response to the Santa Barbara oil spill and other well-publicized environmental disasters. Laws react to and are often enforced in correlation to public opinion. So what then are the justifications that the law currently uses for the protection of archaeological resources? First, there's the data factor. We want to protect information specifically. In order to gather the relevant information, processes have to be undertaken following certain standards. Sites have to be free from disturbance from outside forces or parties, and the information has to be as pure as possible. Then there's the cultural factor, that there are community values and traditional cultural values that need to be protected and preserved by protecting these resources through good archaeological practice. Despite these reasons as to why these sites are important, only about 7% of the sites currently listed on the National Register are archaeological sites. Archaeological sites can be extremely fragile, and there are many agents that can alter, damage, or destroy them. We aren't really going to discuss natural forces because obviously there's nothing you can do to legislate flooding. But if you wanted to think like a lawyer, finding a way to make flooding a legal issue isn't too hard. You just have to go a bit beyond the actual idea of natural forces themselves, maybe to argue the indirect impact idea that we do build flood control structures like dams and levees, or that people have a tendency to steal things that surface after floods. But we're not going to go that far in this class. Of course, there's human action also, looting or theft, vandalism, recreation, noise vibration from traffic or aircrafts. There's institutional actions like excavation, agriculture, mining, timbering, oil and gas exploration, land modifications for things like flood control, land development for things like trails or highways. There are legal or regulatory procedures that can impact archaeological resources. incompatible laws, regulations, or procedures. This can mean things like historic preservation ordinances that don't consider archaeology, master plans that don't consider it, or regulatory procedures. Think along the lines of something like a process for approving a regrading or a construction permit. These can all have adverse impacts if archaeological sites aren't considered. The most significant cause of destruction of archaeological heritage is looting. This is, as you know, a global problem. We have artifact thefts on state lands in the United States, and looting is a common occurrence in conflict zones. People go overseas and bring back things they shouldn't. This looting is often used at the international and national level to fund other criminal action.
Drug addicts will steal whatever they can to pay for their fix.
What they're stealing now is immensely valuable to everyone, but it sits out in the open, mostly unguarded, ripe for the picking. Kim Holland reports they're robbing New Mexico of its past.
The land of enchantment is rich in history and culture. There are still clues buried beneath the soil that hold secrets to our past. But we're losing some of that history. There is a new epidemic of looting. Thieves are stealing ancient artifacts from public lands and selling or trading them for drug money. In 2004, someone dug up 10 pots from a prehistoric Puebloan archaeological site. This is an illegal dig at another New Mexico Pueblo ruin.
It pays big bucks. That's why they do it.
When land is pillaged, it becomes increasingly difficult to understand past cultures. There is still so much history undiscovered, but it is illegal to dig up, disturb, or take any artifact from any public land. You must have a permit to do so, and without it, you could be facing federal time. And crooks do serve time. 49-year-old Augustine Chavez is serving time for selling these ancient leggings made out of human hair.
I'd never seen anything like that.
They're more than 100 years old and are invaluable. Another Cibola County man says he found them in 1972.
He told us he was out exploring caves with some other friends, and they discovered these items rolled up in an ancient Indian pot in a cave.
That homeowner hung the leggings in his home until 2004, when investigators say his stepson stole them and sold them to drug dealer Augustine Chavez.
0096.
An undercover sting caught Chavez trying to sell them for $1,800.
I think it's like any Indian artifact. They were highly valued in any community.
Because of the large amount of pot, meth, and a collection of handguns and an assault rifle deputies found in his home, Chavez is now serving federal time. Criminals are looking for certain artifacts they know have value, and they're very knowledgeable about what the market wants. This is a big business, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a big business internationally, not just in New Mexico or in the United States. $5 to $6 billion a year of illegal artifacts are trafficked across the country, across the world.
Illegally buying and stealing artifacts is lucrative, right behind gun and drug trafficking. In 2004, someone looted and desecrated graves from the Fort Craig site in Socorro County. The criminals stole Civil War-era artifacts. The drug-fueled thefts don't seem to be slowing down because the West is so vast, it's hard to police so much open land. Kim Holland, KRQE News 13.
The New Mexico State Historic Preservation Division has a program called Site Watch. Volunteers help keep an eye on the cultural treasures and report vandalism and theft all over the state.
Institutional actions are also a problem. You'll remember the large-scale undertakings like dam construction or road building or mining require the disturbance of a lot of earth. Things like the construction of, maybe a pipeline would cause significant impacts on archaeological resources. And of course, inadequate laws are just as guilty of causing damage to archaeological resources. This could mean, for example, an inadequate ordinance at the local level. For example, Charleston, South Carolina, one of the first places to create a preservation ordinance, to this day has no municipal ordinance addressing archaeology. We do have a national strategy for federal archaeology. It is our nation's goal to prevent the destruction of these resources, which is, of course, accomplished with a number of different laws. Laws address human problems like looting with acts including but not limited to the Antiquities Act, ARPA, NAGPRA, the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, and internationally the Hague Convention. The procedural requirements that we've discussed, and some like NAGPRA that we'll discuss later, can address institutional actions and legal and regulatory procedures. There could be an entire course designed around archaeology and federal law, not to mention the fact that so many states have their own laws as well, and even local governments have their own laws. We obviously aren't going to be able to address all of them, but let's start with taking a look again at the Antiquities Act.